My name is Rick, but most of my friends call me Head. I've spent a significant portion of my professional life as a broadcast engineer at WBDK, a local CBS station located in Atlanta, Georgia. My educational background includes an impressive graduate degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in electrical engineering and computer science, along with another degree in broadcast technologies. Over the past 22 years, I have navigated the intricacies of this industry, taking on a range of challenging roles and responsibilities. For the last 5 years, I've made Atlanta my home after a stint hopping around various television stations along the East Coast. At 46 years old, I stand tall at 6 feet 3 inches and weigh about 190 pounds. Some people might say I've got a certain appeal, but I wouldn't exactly classify myself as a television heartthrob. On a more personal note, I have been happily married to my wife, Sharon, for 22 years. We have 2 daughters, Melanie and Stephanie. Melanie is already married, while Stephanie is on the verge of graduating from college, marking an exciting time in our family. As for Sharon, she has long blonde hair, stands at about 5 feet 5 inches, and weighs no more than 135 pounds. She's a genuine sweetheart, both inside and out, and for the past year and a half, she has been working as a secretary for our pastor, Reverend Bob Shelter. Last Friday, I found myself with a bit of extra time during lunch, so I planned a surprise outing for Sharon to show her how much I appreciated her. I parked at the side entrance of the church office, avoiding the rain, with the intention of getting closer to the door. To my surprise, when I arrived at her office, it was empty. I decided to go inside and wait. While I was sitting there, I happened to overhear Sharon having a conversation with Pastor Bob in his office. She expressed her excitement about the upcoming Monday night, mentioning how fortunate we were that I worked on the Monday night football broadcasts for the station, as it allowed us some quality time together. During their discussion, Sharon inquired about a reservation she thought had been made, and Pastor Bob confirmed that everything was set, including a booking for the Whirlpool suite. That's when I began to hear some rustling sounds, followed by Sharon's moans. A wave of shock washed over me, and I felt a surge of nausea as anger started to bubble up inside. The realization hit me hard that I was possibly witnessing something I never wanted to see. I needed to leave before I did something I would regret in a moment of heated emotion. The urge to confront them was strong, but I hesitated, aware that losing my temper could lead to a regrettable situation. I was filled with a mix of fury and heartbreak, grappling with the decision to walk away rather than risk physical confrontation. I was pretty sure that neither Sharon nor Pastor Bob had noticed my presence, as I had entered and exited through the side door, out of the watchful eye of the church's security cameras. The emotional turmoil from that moment left me feeling shaken, and I knew I wouldn't be able to focus on work for the rest of the day. I called my workplace to explain that I was unwell and needed to head home to process everything. Sharon wouldn't be back until after 4 p.m., which gave me plenty of time to think about the shocking revelation I had stumbled upon. The realization that Sharon was involved with Pastor Bob sank in, and I knew that I could no longer view him as my pastor. My priority shifted to uncovering the depth of their relationship, how long it had been going on and what had prompted this betrayal in what I had thought was a happy marriage. I understand that many people prefer not to dig into the specifics of such situations, believing that they won't yield any useful answers, but I am not one of those individuals. I felt an urgent need to grasp why this had transpired within the framework of our seemingly perfect marriage, one that Sharon apparently viewed quite differently than I had imagined. The sweet person I thought I knew now felt like a stranger, and my determination to uncover the full truth grew stronger. I wasn't going to shy away from the reality of the situation. I was resolute in ensuring that both of them faced the consequences of their actions. Once I arrived home, I knew the journey to uncovering the truth was just beginning. I brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and decided to step outside to the patio. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over everything, and the pleasant weather, combined with the refreshing air, created the perfect atmosphere for contemplation. I hoped that this serene setting would help clear my mind, as I was desperate to make sense of the whirlwind of events that had unfolded in my life. My heart was heavy, and I won't deny that tears flowed down my cheeks that afternoon. The pain felt raw and real, hitting me deep. I understood, on some level, that I didn't own Sharon or her body. After all, she was a person with her own autonomy. But the idea that she had become sexually involved with another man, or perhaps even multiple men, while she had promised herself to me on our wedding day felt like a dagger to my heart. I knew there were people out there who might brush off marriage vows as mere words, but to me, they were a solemn promise, a commitment that I believed she took seriously as well. This situation forced me to confront my entire belief system, to reevaluate my understanding of love and loyalty. It made me wonder if I had been naive my entire life to trust in faithfulness when it seemed so easily discarded by others. The most devastating aspect of infidelity, I realized, isn't just the physical act itself, it's the erosion of trust that follows. It shakes the very foundation of your relationship, leaving you questioning whether the person you've trusted completely has ever truly had your back. In that moment, despite standing tall at 6 feet 3 inches and weighing 190 pounds, I felt utterly vulnerable and scared. It highlighted just how deeply a cheating spouse can impact someone's emotional well-being. As I sat there, wrestling with my emotions while attempting to maintain a sense of calm and logic, I found myself reflecting on various instances throughout our relationship. There were moments I had questioned in the past, small things that at the time seemed inconsequential, but now those memories loomed heavily in my mind. They churned painfully in my stomach as I began to connect the dots, and it hit me hard how easily I had placed my trust in her. That trust, once so solid, now lay shattered and abandoned. What I needed most were cold, hard facts. I craved clarity. I wanted to uncover the details surrounding this betrayal, the duration of the affair, its frequency, the locations, and who else might be entangled in this mess. My previously unwavering trust had evaporated, and I was determined to get the answers I so desperately needed. As an appropriate measure, I decided I couldn't face Sharon just yet. I knew that revealing my feelings would only complicate things further. So at 3 p.m., I made the decision to leave the house before she returned. I drove into town and stopped by the station to gather a few things I would need for the next couple of days. While there, I popped into my boss's office and requested a couple of days off early in the week, citing some personal issues and not feeling well. He agreed without any hesitation, and I felt a slight weight lift from my shoulders. With that taken care of, I headed over to Frankie's place to hang out until I had to return home around 5 p.m. Before going back, I called Sharon to let her know I would be stopping someplace for a while, which meant I wouldn't be home for dinner. I could sense her annoyance through the phone. She mentioned that she was feeling amorous that evening and teased that I would have been in for a treat had I been around. My plans were already set, so I smiled and told her to keep the mood hot for me, assuring her that I'd take care of her when I got home. However, she replied with a stern tone, warning me not to count on it if I treated her like this. Deep down, I thought to myself that this reaction was precisely what I wanted to provoke. I arrived home close to 10:30 p.m., feeling a bit intoxicated but not so far gone that I couldn't notice the bedroom door was shut and locked. A smirk crept across my face as I knocked, half expecting she wouldn't be awake. I playfully shouted, "Fine, if this is the game you want to play, then don't expect any intimacy from me. Just deal with it." With that, I turned away and made my way to the spare bedroom. The following morning, as I woke up and ventured into the kitchen, I found her seated at the table with a cup of coffee in hand. I could tell the coffee had cooled a little the moment I stepped into the room. If I hadn't known about her unfaithfulness, I would have sensed something was off. The air was thick with tension. I managed a friendly smile, telling her there was no need to get up and make breakfast, as I would just grab something on my way to the golf course. After that, I walked out of the kitchen, headed to the garage, and loaded my golf clubs into the trunk of my car before driving off. Shortly after I hit the road, my cell phone buzzed, revealing it was Sharon calling. I glanced at the screen but decided not to answer, feeling like it was the right choice in that moment. A few minutes later, the monotone beep of my phone echoed through the quiet space, signaling that she had left me a voicemail. As I listened to the message, a wave of frustration washed over me. It was filled with fury and disbelief. She was demanding to know how I could possibly do this to her, and insisting that I return immediately. The truth, however, was quite different from her accusations. I had no intention of actually going golfing that day. That excuse was merely a cover to grant myself a few precious hours to manage what I truly needed to address. My real destination was my former church. The very thought of sitting through another one of Bob's sermons was the last thing I wanted, but it was a necessary evil. Arriving at the church while it was still early offered me some reassurance. I figured there was a good chance that no one would be there. As I stepped through the familiar entrance, the weight of the key in my pocket served as a reminder that my wife worked there, giving me unfettered access to the building. My footsteps were quiet as I made my way directly to the offices. My goal was to set up remote micro cameras and mini microphones in both her office and Bob's office. Setting everything up did not take long. I worked swiftly to conceal the transmitter behind some old hymnals in the supply closet across the hall. With the receiver secured in my car's trunk, I wired it into my car's electrical system, creating a surveillance hub that would allow me to monitor their conversations and activities whenever they were in their respective offices. Although I didn't anticipate that they would engage in much at the church, I was confident that even minimal interactions could yield valuable information over the next few days. Once I was satisfied that everything was functioning correctly, I decided to snoop through her desk. Unfortunately, my search yielded nothing of significance, yet as I perused her calendar, a large asterisk marking Monday caught my attention. This note lined up perfectly with what I had overheard just days prior, which set my mind racing with possibilities. It was clear I needed to be prepared for whatever might occur on that day. Next, I turned my focus to Bob's office, hoping for better luck. Initially, it seemed like I might come up empty again, but just when I felt my options were dwindling, inspiration struck in a rather ironic setting. In a place synonymous with faith, I decided to search the filing cabinets for church expense receipts. To my surprise, I unearthed a file containing multiple receipts from the LA Inn in Roswell. Some receipts dated back to late 2019, while a couple were dated in the spring of 2020. Realizing time was not on my side and that I was pushing my luck by lingering too long, I quickly made copies of the receipts, intending to take them with me. After tidying up the office to mask my intrusion, I made my exit. My next move was to head over to the golf course, where I parked in my usual spot. I strolled into the clubhouse, making my way straight to the bar. I wanted to make sure a few people noticed me. This would be important for my alibi. I found a table tucked away in the back and ordered a Sprite, planning to spend a couple of hours there to establish my presence. During that time, I meticulously examined the receipts I had copied. My scrutiny revealed that both of the receipts from late 2019 were for Mondays, and the two from the spring of 2020 exactly coincided with dates when I had attended a conference at CBS headquarters in New York. What infuriated me the most was the audacity of Bob to charge those motel rooms to the church, disguising them as conference room rentals for meetings he was supposedly conducting with my wife in a motel room. I had unwittingly footed the bill while we contributed to the church, and that betrayal stung deeply. I made a firm decision: there would be no more donations from me. Their reckoning was drawing near, and all I needed was a bit more evidence to seal their fate. It became abundantly clear to me that this affair had likely been ongoing for close to a year, if not even longer. This timeline aligned perfectly with the hints I had begun to pick up on earlier. My suspicion grew that Bob had been involved with her even before she started working under him at the church. She had previously held a solid job as a receptionist at the Telfer Corporation, but when the opportunity arose to work at the church, she jumped at the chance. I remembered her excited words: "Honey, it'll be so close to home, and I'll be working for the church. What could be better than that? Plus, the pay is almost as good as what I was making at Telfer. How can I pass this up?" Sounds great on paper, but it was all too evident that she was more interested in the bonus perks that came with the job. I couldn't believe how blind I had been to the signs. A mix of anger and disgust filled me as I considered the fact that my loving wife could betray me in such a vile manner. Determination surged through me, a powerful resolve to make them both pay for their actions and restore my sense of justice. I decided it was time for some serious investigation. Stepping outside, I made my way to my car and quickly connected my iPod to the receiver I had stored in the trunk. After a few minutes of scrolling through the dense data, I noticed Bob walk into his office. From my vantage point, I could see him pick up his phone and initiate a call. A wave of regret washed over me as I realized I hadn't placed a bug on his phone. That misstep was now out of my control. Listening in, I could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was enough to spark my curiosity. "Yeah, Sharon, I'm at the church. I came right after you called. Why don't you tell me what's bothering you?" he said. My mind raced. Had he done this before? He continued, "I see. What do you think set him off?" Then, in a tone that suggested casual familiarity, he asked, "Do you think he's suspicious of anything?" His laughter echoed through my receiver as he added, "All right, well, you can get back at him on Monday night." After the call ended, he sat in silence for a moment, deep in thought. Just as I was about to shut down the transmission and save the data, he mumbled something barely audible, but I managed to capture those few words. I saved that sound bite, instinctively knowing it would prove useful later on. Once the transmission was off, I drove back home. Anticipating that the atmosphere might be tense, I decided to occupy my mind with some yard work. I pulled out the lawnmower and tackled the overgrown grass, followed by some chores in the basement to keep myself busy. Upon walking back inside the house, I noticed she didn't say much. However, the tension in the air felt so thick that it was almost suffocating. During dinner, I opted to ignore her presence, focusing instead on my meal while she sat across from me, seemingly fixated on my every movement. Eventually, she attempted to break the silence by asking what had been bothering me lately and why my behavior had been so strange. I reminded her about the previous night when she had locked me out of our bedroom. I pointed out how rarely I went out with friends, emphasizing that the one occasion I had chosen to do so had led to her becoming upset and making threats. I insisted that her actions had led us to this tense situation, not mine. In response, she snapped back with an expletive that reflected her frustration. I took note of her language, which didn't align with the behavior expected of someone who professed to be a devout Christian with strong convictions. Her reaction revealed guilt etching itself across her face, an expression I found difficult to overlook. Despite the tension, she managed to regain her composure and eventually left the table, leaving me to ponder how she would respond when the truth eventually surfaced. Later that evening, she entered the family room where I was watching television, her eyes slightly reddened, suggesting that she had been crying. The rest of the evening progressed without any dramatic incidents. When I decided to call it a night, I made my way down the hallway to the spare bedroom, settling in for some much-needed rest. A few minutes later, she entered the room, standing there silently. I asked her what she wanted, to which she replied, "Aren't you going to come to bed?" My response was straightforward, "Nope, you've made it clear that there won't be any intimacy in the near future, so I might as well get a good night's sleep alone." With those words, she exited the room in tears, but frankly, I was indifferent to her emotional state. Come Sunday morning, she woke me at 8 a.m., fully dressed for church, inviting me to join her. I declined, explaining that attending church was not on my agenda. As she left the room, a certain look crossed her face, one that suggested she was finally beginning to grasp the depth of our situation. Throughout the day, we hardly spoke, retreating to our separate rooms as the silence thickened around us. On Monday morning, I left the house without saying a word to her. As the day unfolded, she called me, her voice heavy with emotion, expressing her apologies and love. I assured her that we would discuss everything later that evening and ended the call. Afterward, I contacted my boss, informing him that I would be taking the day off while still confirming my commitment to cover the Monday night football game. He seemed satisfied with my availability and asked how things were going. I replied that everything was proceeding as expected. My next destination was the Ladat Inn in Roswell. I walked into the motel lobby, trying to maintain the guise of just another guy on the job. I spotted the clerk, a young man named Kevin, who appeared more engrossed in his phone than aware of the world around him. Approaching him with a clipboard in hand, I prepared to engage him in conversation and gather the information I needed. They received a service call for the Whirlpool suite, and I was there, tapping on a makeshift work order that I had hastily assembled. It bore a complaint about the air conditioning unit making a racket, something all too familiar given the oppressive heat we were experiencing. Kevin, my colleague, glanced at the clipboard, his brow knit in confusion as he read the details. Maintaining a professional demeanor, I kept my expression neutral as I answered his question about which room I was headed to, a hint of puzzlement manifesting in his voice. When I provided him with the suite number, I sensed a brief moment where he might challenge me. But instead, he simply nodded, handed me the key card, and instructed me to make it quick. In no time, I was inside the room and dropped my tool bag on the floor. However, rather than being filled with traditional tools like wrenches and gauges, it contained my high-tech surveillance gear, microphones, cameras, and all the gadgets that I needed. I was masquerading as the maintenance guy while actually orchestrating my own covert operation to catch my wife in the act of infidelity. The setup went smoothly. I concealed the devices in such a way that they were nearly undetectable. I exited the room as swiftly as I had entered, giving Kevin a casual nod on my way out and assuring him that the noise from the air conditioning had been taken care of. He barely looked up from his screen, lost in his work, and I left feeling somewhat like a secret agent, channeling my inner James Bond. Kevin had no inkling of my true intentions, and I was one step closer to uncovering the reality of my wife's actions. With some time to spare, I turned my attention to other pressing matters that needed my attention. First on the agenda was a visit to our bank, where I obtained cashier's checks for half of the funds from both our checking and savings accounts. Once that was completed, I made the decision to cancel our joint credit cards, ensuring that any potential financial entanglements would be severed. My next call of duty involved contacting my broker to arrange a meeting right after lunch to make necessary adjustments to our investment accounts. I also reached out to my attorney to discuss the impending divorce and other legal matters, scheduling an appointment for later that afternoon when he would be available to meet. I then drove to Planters National Bank in Marietta, Georgia, where I opened new accounts in my name only, depositing the cashier's checks I had just procured. After securing my finances, I grabbed lunch in Marietta. Although the meal felt more like a chore than a pleasure, I pressed on, knowing I needed to stay focused on the tasks at hand. Once I finished eating, I headed to my broker's office to review the changes he had prepared for my investment portfolio. The proposed changes would ensure that our investments were divided equally without incurring any unwanted tax implications, as selling assets could lead to complications I wanted to avoid. I took the necessary paperwork with me before heading to meet my attorney. In our meeting, we reviewed the divorce papers he had drafted. I proposed a no-fault divorce that would allow for an equal split of assets, contingent on my wife agreeing to sign the documents immediately. In the event she refused, I instructed him to include a clause for filing based on adultery, reinforcing my resolve. I felt fairly confident she would sign the papers without hesitation. After wrapping things up, all that was left on my agenda was to grab some dinner and head to the station to oversee the Monday Night Football broadcast. After leaving my attorney's office, I turned on my cell phone to check for messages, and to my surprise, I had received a couple from Sharon. In her texts, she expressed deep concern for me and urged me to come home before the game. She mentioned how my recent behavior was troubling her and professed her love, revealing her emotional turmoil over the whole situation. Despite my knowledge of her plans for the evening, her messages struck a chord, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had been the biggest fool for ever loving and trusting her. A decision began to form in my mind. I realized that the only chance of salvaging our marriage would hinge on whether she showed up at the motel that night. Her choice would serve as a clear indication of her feelings and whether she cared enough to salvage what was left of our relationship, especially considering its fragile state. At 8 p.m., I activated the surveillance system, setting it to fully automated broadcast mode as Monday Night Football commenced. I configured the system to closely monitor the feed from the motel room where I had hidden the equipment. At exactly 8:15 p.m., Bob entered the room and made a call, casually informing Sharon, "Hey baby, I'm in the room. Get over here as quickly as you can." I listened intently as Sharon replied, "Okay, honey, I'll be there in a few minutes." After ending the call, I overheard Bob muttering a few more words that piqued my interest. I would need to replay the recording later to capture the full context of the conversation. My marriage seemed to be falling apart, unraveling before my very eyes. Even though I never anticipated that she would make the decision to end things, the pain of that realization struck me profoundly. This entire experience only served to strengthen my resolve to ensure that those responsible would face the consequences of their actions. I pulled out my list of contacts and began the arduous task of dialing numbers, a process that consumed nearly 30 minutes of my time. Meanwhile, Sharon had already arrived at the motel, so I resumed my watch over the video and audio feed. As I monitored the situation, I heard Sharon's voice, filled with a mix of excitement and vulnerability, exclaiming, "Oh God, Bobby, the thought of you being intimate with me excites me so much. I really value these nights together." Her words were a slap in the face, betraying the trust one once had in her. Bobby, her accomplice, encouraged her to come closer and promised her, "Tonight, darling, I'm going to fulfill your desires." The moment she responded, saying, "I adore it when you talk passionately to me, Bobby," my heart sank further. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized that I was witnessing a dark transformation. Here were a pastor and a church secretary, along with my once kind and loving wife, descending into an abyss of depravity that was unfathomable to me. In the moments that followed, I was about to witness the extent to which things could spiral out of control. There was no doubt in my mind that they both deserved to face the consequences that awaited them. Sharon positioned herself on the bed, and I struggled to articulate the emotional turmoil churning inside me. The person who had once been the love of my life was now engaged in an act that shattered the remnants of our future together. My heart ached with agony, yet my simmering anger kept me focused. If they had seen me in that moment, they might have felt a cold shiver of fear and dread. At that instant, much of my humanity felt lost. All that remained was a singular purpose: to bring them to justice. Having endured their betrayal for 45 agonizing minutes, I felt I had seen enough. It was halftime during the football game, and I switched the system to live assist mode, gearing up to replay the recording of Bob and Sharon from the very beginning. Within minutes, my phone began ringing incessantly. I chose to ignore the calls, but then I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Sharon's number. The ringing echoed through the monitors, and she glanced at her phone, remarking, "It's him. This time I won't answer his call. Let's see how he likes it." I hung up and redialed. Eventually, she gave in, saying, "I suppose I should answer it," and retrieved her phone from her purse. When she answered, her tone was laced with venom as she greeted me, her irritation palpable. I feigned curiosity about her whereabouts and activities. She explained that she had gone shopping since I hadn't called her earlier and planned to grab some food before heading home. With a touch of sarcasm, I asked if she was still shopping, to which she confirmed, proudly mentioning that she intended to spend a significant amount of money. I couldn't help myself. I shot back a sarcastic line, thanking her for being such a wonderful wife. Her reaction was swift and hostile. She told me not to speak to her that way, expressing confusion about my behavior before abruptly hanging up. There she was, using the same term of endearment that had once brought warmth to our relationship, but I knew the truth. The real issue was the man named Bob in her motel room. As their activities appeared to be winding down, I contemplated interrupting, knowing she wouldn't answer her cell phone again. I then dialed the motel number. "Kevin, it's me. Aren't you watching Monday Night Football?" I asked. "No. You should be. Could you ring the Whirlpool suite for me?" After just 2 rings, he picked up, and I requested to speak to Sharon. When she finally came on the line, she questioned my reason for calling. I took a deep breath and said, "Well, Sharon, it's like this. I know you've been unfaithful, and I'm well aware of your location and activities. I plan to file for divorce, and you'll find yourself without a place to stay. Bob might also face some consequences." Her confusion was evident as she responded, "What are you talking about, Head? I can't make sense of your recent behavior. What's going on with you?" I simply replied, "Sharon, the charade is over. I suggest you turn on Monday Night Football and enjoy the halftime show. I'll see you later." With that, I hung up and watched on the live monitor as she got up to turn on the TV, knowing that the revelation of her betrayal was just beginning to unfold. As the evening progressed, I switched on the television, eager to catch the Monday Night Football broadcast. However, my excitement quickly turned to horror. "Oh my God, no," she screamed, her voice filled with disbelief and anguish as she frantically realized what was on the screen. It was a streaming video of herself and Bob, captured during their intimate moments, and due to a delay in the live feed, she was witnessing a significant portion of what the entire Atlanta area had already seen. Her reaction was a whirlwind of panic, restricted mainly to the desperate repetition of, "Oh no," as she hastily scrambled to put her clothes back on, determined to escape the scene. Meanwhile, Bob was equally frantic, cursing under his breath, consumed by a mix of rage and embarrassment as he muttered, "I will kick that son of a bitch, I will kick him." He was unaware that his words could potentially come back to haunt him. Once they had fled the room, I quickly shut off the monitors, allowing the video stream to run for just 1 more minute. After that, I switched off the live assist mode, reverting the system back to its fully automated broadcast configuration. I took the tape of the incident, knowing that leaving the broadcast booth might be my last opportunity to do so, and grabbed a few personal belongings from my desk. The reality of the situation weighed heavily on me. After leaving the building, I spent the remainder of the night at Frankie's bar. My performance at halftime had become the hot topic among patrons discussing the game. After the final whistle blew, I caught a cab and headed home, dreading what awaited me. Upon my arrival, I found Sharon sitting alone in the dimly lit living room. The phone had been disconnected, and it was painfully clear that she had been crying uncontrollably. Her tear-streaked face conveyed the anguish she felt, yet strangely, her tears did little to affect me. I was resolute. In my mind, everything had come to an end. Sharon broke the heavy silence, asking through her sobs, "How could you do this to me after all these years together? How could you?" My response was firm and unwavering. "No, Sharon, the real question is how could you do this to me?" I was inebriated and made it clear I was going to bed, suggesting we could talk in the morning. She remained motionless, a testament to her shock and distress, as I left the room and retreated to the spare bedroom, attempting to escape the chaos of the situation. The following morning brought with it a painful hangover, and as I emerged from the spare bedroom, I found Sharon still curled up on the sofa, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept at all. While her misery was evident, I found that I lacked any sympathy. To me, she had orchestrated this mess herself. Nonchalantly, I put the phone back on the hook, and almost immediately, it began to ring incessantly. For the next hour and a half, I fielded a barrage of calls from family members, her parents, friends, church acquaintances, my now ex-boss, and both of my daughters. Each voice on the other end of the line was filled with a mix of concern and anger, deeply upset by what they had witnessed the night before. Nothing I said seemed to provide any comfort. I knew it was a harsh reality for them to face, but they were adults and would eventually come to terms with it. In the midst of the chaos, I also received a call from Mrs. Bob, who wanted to know if I had kept a copy of the entire incident on tape. I assured her that I had a secure copy saved and would provide it to her if she needed it. It quickly became evident that nearly everyone I spoke to had tuned into the controversial halftime show, and they didn't hesitate to share their opinions. While some were furious about the explicit content, others, including Sharon's parents, found my actions unforgivable in terms of exposing her in such a manner. The majority, however, expressed understanding and sympathy towards my perspective. As the phone continued to ring, I became more overwhelmed by the ordeal. Sharon stayed ensconced on the sofa, sobbing quietly throughout this tumultuous morning. Eventually, I decided to leave the phone off the hook once more, opting to brew a pot of coffee to clear my head. When I returned, I offered Sharon a cup and handed her the divorce papers along with the investment documents that required her signature. "Sharon," I began, firm and unyielding, "I'm filing for divorce. After discovering your infidelity and witnessing what I did last night, it's clear you have been cheating on me for at least a year or longer. There is no way I can continue in this marriage." Holding up the papers, I added, "These are the divorce documents. If you read through them, you'll see that I'm asking for a no-fault divorce and proposing an equal division of our assets. I need you to sign both the divorce agreement and the investment division agreement right now. There will be no negotiations or modifications to these documents, they are entirely fair to you. I made it clear, I will give you until 5 p.m. today to consult with an attorney and confirm that my offer is fair. At 5:01 p.m., the deal will be off the table, and I will file for divorce on the grounds of your infidelity." The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air, signaling a definitive end to what once was, highlighting the irrevocable path we were both now set upon. On the grounds of adultery, I made it clear that I would pursue a property distribution that accurately reflects our individual contributions to our marriage. My contributions were significantly greater than hers, and when considering our respective incomes, it became evident that I would be seeking a fair share based on these factors. To put it bluntly, I intended to go after everything I could rightfully claim. I wanted her to understand that the deal I was proposing was the best she could expect under the circumstances. I stressed that she should take it seriously. I had already warned her about the implications of contesting a divorce based on adultery. The truth of the matter was that the entire city of Atlanta would eventually know of her unfaithfulness. This was a reality she could not escape, especially considering I had overheard her confessing her desires to Bob. Now, that wish of hers had come to fruition, and the consequences were public for all to see. I urged her to accept the deal, emphasizing the urgency of her situation. Sharon, in a state of desperation, pleaded with me, expressing her love and her desire to save our marriage. She suggested that perhaps we could find a way to work things out. I responded with firm resolve, acknowledging her feelings but reminding her that love no longer held any weight in our relationship. The reality was that our marriage had effectively ended the moment she chose to engage in an affair with him. That decision had irrevocably altered the course of our lives together. I advised her to take a moment to gather herself and consult with an attorney, as time was not on her side. Later that day, she returned home, carrying the divorce papers. She informed me that her attorney advised her to sign the documents, indicating that he felt my settlement offer was fair given the entire context of our situation. Yet, she wanted to talk. She asked if I could listen to her and possibly consider the idea of forgiveness and working together to salvage our failing marriage. I agreed to sit down with her because I genuinely wanted to understand the motivations behind her actions. I wanted to know if this was a singular incident or if there had been others in our relationship that I had been unaware of. We settled at the kitchen table, and Sharon began to explain her perspective. She revealed that this affair with Bob was the first of its kind, there had been no other instances of infidelity prior to this. She confessed that the affair had started shortly before she began working for Bob, and although she stated she was completely happy with me, she couldn't quite explain why she was drawn to him. Sharon spoke about Bob's charismatic nature and how it seemed he had genuine feelings for her. It struck me how she was behaving, making it seem as though her tears and apologies could somehow fix everything. It was almost as if she thought that her expressions of regret were sufficient to erase the damage done. But the reality was, she had broken the vows we took, and an apology wouldn't be nearly enough to mend the rifts that had formed as a result of her choices. It reminded me of a child caught in mischief who tries to charm their way out of trouble with a cute smile. Unfortunately for her, this was real life, and sorry simply wouldn't suffice. I acknowledged Bob's charm but then shattered her idealized image of him by presenting evidence that contradicted her beliefs. I played back 2 voice recordings that I had preserved. The first captured Bob muttering about being careful, warning that idiot better make sure her husband doesn't find out about our affair. The second recording revealed Bob's intent just moments before she arrived at my home, where he stated, "I'm going to use her tonight. Tomorrow if she causes any trouble, I'll threaten to tell her husband, and that should keep her in line." It became clear to me that not only had Sharon damaged our marriage, but she had also miscalculated Bob's feelings towards her. I laid it bare for her. There was no way I could continue with our marriage for 2 critical reasons. Firstly, her breach of our marital vows was something I couldn't accept, and living with that betrayal was not an option. Secondly, I believed that she would never find genuine happiness with me again. After this betrayal, I could not fulfill her emotional needs as I once did. No matter how much love remained between us, it simply wouldn't be enough to overcome the profound damage that had been inflicted upon our relationship. As she sat there, tears streaming down her face, it was evident that she grasped the truth in my words. Ultimately, she signed both sets of divorce papers. I informed her of my decision to move out, allowing her the necessary time to find a new living arrangement. I had my doubts about her ability to maintain the house on her own, and frankly, I didn't want to remain in that environment any longer. Our agreement stipulated that the house would be sold and the profits divided evenly, just like our other assets. The course was set, and there was no turning back now. The assets I owned, apart from the house, carried a weight of nostalgia and memories that I found too burdensome to carry into the next chapter of my life. With a heavy heart, I meticulously gathered the paperwork and bags that I had organized the day before, each item reminding me of what I was leaving behind. After my last look at the house that had been a backdrop to so many moments, I stepped away and made my way to my broker's office. There, I intended to drop off the necessary papers that would signify yet another step towards a fresh start. Following that meeting, I checked into a nearby hotel for the night, wanting to create some distance from everything familiar and steeped in memories. The next morning held an appointment with my attorney, a meeting that loomed large in my mind. We sat down together to discuss the divorce papers, and he assured me that he would file them with the Superior Court in our county that very day. It was an especially daunting task to navigate the discussions surrounding my divorce while also considering my precarious situation at the radio station and the looming specter of the FCC. My attorney laid out the harsh realities of the situation. The FCC possessed substantial power, capable of imposing civil fines, revoking broadcasting licenses, or even denying renewal applications. If I were to be found in violation of their rules, I could potentially face criminal fines and, in serious cases, a prison sentence of up to 2 years. Although my attorney reassured me that jail time was unlikely given my circumstances, the prospect of facing hefty fines and the end of my broadcasting career was becoming a reality I could not ignore. In just a few days, the consequences of my actions hit me like a ton of bricks. I was served with formal legal notices from the FCC, triggering a whirlwind of anxiety as I had to prepare for several days in court to defend myself. The intricate details of the case are not something I wish to dwell on, but it's crucial to understand that the fine imposed upon me equated to nearly an entire year's worth of salary, depleting my savings account dramatically. The situation grew even bleaker when I learned that my broadcasting license had been revoked, effectively barring me from working in my field for the next 2 years. Amidst these setbacks, a glimmer of hope emerged unexpectedly. TT, who like me had watched Monday Night Football, responded to my situation with unexpected compassion. Despite the illegality and vindictiveness of my prior actions, he offered me a job that adhered to the FCC's restrictions. It seemed that he was no stranger to his own troubles, particularly in the context of his recent divorce, which had involved frustrations with Henry's daughter and Peter's sister. This shared understanding perhaps softened his approach towards me during this time of hardship. In retrospect, I found a strange sense of gratitude towards HJ for his compassion in that tough moment. Meanwhile, confrontation was never far behind. Bob confronted me one evening at Frankie's, appearing visibly agitated and ready to throw a punch. In a moment of steely resolve, I managed to grip one of his arms firmly and stated, "Listen, Bob, I don't ever want to hear from you again. Is that clear?" He grumbled a reluctant agreement. At that moment, a part of me felt inclined to deal him a final blow, not physically but with words. I possess an audio recording of you making threats against me. If I take that to the police, I believe I have every right to file for a restraining order and possibly pursue assault charges. With the evidence I have, you could end up serving time in prison. Is that what you want? His head shook in denial as I delivered one more kick for emphasis, making it clear that this would indeed be our last interaction. Bob's downward spiral continued as he lost his position as a pastor, with the church and denomination revoking his license and nullifying his ordination. The last I heard, he was working at a city travel agency after his wife divorced him citing adultery, leaving her with a considerable settlement. As for me, I was determined to move forward with my life. It was not a perfect situation, but I was actively seeking ways to find happiness amidst the chaos. Over the past several months, I had gone on a few dates, but none evolved into anything serious. I held on to the hope that when the right woman crossed my path, I would be ready to marry her, fully aware that it was just a matter of time, and I was willing to invest that time to find someone truly compatible with me. Occasionally, I would run into Sharon at social gatherings. We both attended Stephanie's college graduation and the baptism of Melanie's first child. Each encounter was polite, yet I made it unmistakably clear that I had zero interest in rekindling any friendship or relationship with her. It was evident to me that she was grappling with her own unhappiness, the emotional toll of our breakup clearly etched on her face. I could sense regret in her demeanor, but the crux of the issue lay not in her regret but in the betrayal of trust that had shattered our marriage. If I were a different person, I might have found a way to forgive her, but my values were firmly entrenched, leaving little room for compromise. She will have to carry with her for the rest of her days the heavy burden of knowing what she sacrificed for her affair with Bob. It wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was the life we built together that she willingly threw away. I was simply an ordinary man who loved her with all my heart, but she made the choice to toss that love aside as if it meant nothing. Yes, she chose to let me go, and in doing so, she also surrendered any chance of maintaining her dignity. Anyone who witnessed her infamous display during the halftime show of Monday Night Football can attest to her lack of fidelity. The whispers and rumors swirling around her suggest that she has attracted a multitude of dating offers since our separation. To her credit, she has turned them all down, but one has to wonder how fulfilling that existence can be. Living a life with such self-imposed restrictions seems far from satisfying. However, this state of affairs is not something I inflicted upon her, she brought it all upon herself through her decisions.